Is grading still worth it, or has grading become a scam? And are we in a junk slab era where most slabs today will eventually become worthless? Well, today I'm going to answer these questions, and I'm going to tell you how to tell when it is worth grading a card and when not to grade. The Geoff Wilson Show is brought to you by Arena Club, the official home of slab packs. Now available every day, slab packs offer an exciting way to collect graded cards with confidence. Plus, every pack comes with an instant offer to buy your slab. Don't miss out. Explore the latest slab packs and more by downloading the Arena Club app. Just search Arena Club in your app store and use promo code SCI20 for 20% off your first purchase. So I spent some time recently thinking about this question of whether grading is still worth it during this time when you've got big backlogs at PSA. Things are taking forever to get graded, it seems, and they're raising their prices. And it seems like there's just a lot of dissatisfaction with grading in general right now. If you go look at social media or read the YouTube comments, probably on this video already, there's a lot of people that are complaining about the inconsistencies of grading and the backlog and the prices. And a lot of people are saying grading is just a scam. And in fact, a few days ago on social media, I saw a tweet that was getting popular that was going around where one person posted that they missed the days before grading, when, in their opinion, things were more simple. When you could go to a card show and instead of having to see a bunch of graded cards that dealers were having to pay a bunch of money to grade and send off, everything was just simple. All of the cards were raw, and they missed those days. Well, I got to tell you, those days weren't great. Those days were full of a lot of issues with fake cards and trimmed cards and every single dealer trying to tell you that their card was gem mint or mint condition, even though very few of them actually were. So that era had all kinds of problems as well. I'm not buying into that. But I do think there are legitimate questions about whether grading has gone too far and the importance of grading here in the sports card hobby and the trading card hobby in general here as we sit here in late 2025. And yesterday on the Market Movers YouTube channel, Teapot put out a video that really got me thinking. If you haven't seen the video yet, you got to watch it after you watch this one. It's really fascinating. Teapot and our video team here at Sports Card Investor put together a video where they visualized every single card ever graded. And you really got to see visually for the first time ever how many cards have been graded, and particularly how many cards have been graded in recent years of ultra modern cards. And the numbers are pretty staggering. And Teapot makes some points in that video that really make you think about whether we are in a junk slab era and whether cards that are graded today, whether a lot of those graded cards today are just going to become worthless down the road. Now, personally, are we in a junk slab era? My opinion is kind of, but I don't think it's harmful. And that was the question that Teapot kind of ended his video yesterday with was, is it harmful? Is it a bad thing that all of these slabs have been created? And look, here's my opinion on this. We are in an era of overgrading. There are a lot of cards. Without a doubt, there are tons of cards that have been graded that really didn't need to get graded. And the cost of those cards, the benefit they got from getting graded is outweighed by the grading fee. So there are probably millions of cards out there today. I mean, literally millions of cards where the card is worth less, or at least the price appreciation from getting it graded, going from like a raw to a PSA 9 is less than the grading fee. So it was a bad financial decision to grade that card. However, most of that can only be seen in retrospect. And it was probably not true at the time of the card getting graded. So this idea that we're in a junk slab era, I think, yes, there certainly are a lot of cards out there today that aren't worth it in slabs that didn't need to get graded, but I don't think it's harmful because at the time they got graded, it was actually worthwhile to at least consider getting them graded. So for example, in Teapot's video yesterday, he poked a little fun at me. He used a Lonzo Ball and a Will Greer base optic PSA 9 rookie card as an example. Now, both of those cards, base optic PSA 9 rookies of players who at one point were hot in the sports card market, but have not been hot for years. Those cards are obviously worth hardly anything today. I mean, those are worth pennies, right? I mean, maybe a couple of bucks at most. Certainly not worth the $22 that it would now cost you to grade one of those cards with PSA. They're worth a lot less than that. So it's easy to look at cards like that and say, those never should have been graded. Those are evidence that we're in a junk slab era and this is harmful. But my question is, when did those cards get graded? And was it worth grading at the time they got graded? And the answer was probably yes. The reason why those cards were probably graded is because Lonzo Ball was actually a very hot rookie. He was a top 3 pick in the NBA draft. And a lot of people were speculating on Lonzo Ball cards and thought he was going to have a good career ahead. Will Greer was not quite as popular coming out of college. He was a guy who I thought he was a lower quarterback in the draft, but he was a guy who I thought had a lot of potential and could be one of those sneaky players who's drafted a little bit lower in the draft, but ends up with a really solid starting quarterback role in the NFL. Now, that obviously didn't happen, but at the time that Will Greer's first cards came out and Lonzo Ball's first cards came out, they actually had value. And if you were to have submitted those base optics to PSA and had gotten PSA 10s at the time, you would have actually made a good bit of money by grading those. Today, it looks silly. And especially if you're using PSA 9s as an example, because you hardly ever get money back with ultra modern cards unless they're really high end if you submit them and get a PSA 9 instead of a PSA 10. But back then, it was more of a logical decision. So yes, I do think there are a ton of junk slabs today. And I think there will always be a ton of junk slabs because there will always be speculation. Right now, at this very moment, there are tons of cards every single day being mailed to PSA to get graded of players for good reason. Because if those cards come back in 10s, that will be very, very worth it. And they'll have a lot more value. But a few years from now, people will be laughing at those cards, the cards from today getting submitted. We just don't know which ones. We don't know if they're going to be laughing at Bo Nix or if they're going to be laughing at Drake May or if they're going to be laughing at Michael Penix or who they're going to be laughing at, but they're probably going to be laughing at one of those guys or JJ McCarthy, right? Probably one of those guys 5 years from now. Even their PSA 10 slabs of their base prisms and their base optics and even maybe their optic hollow may not be worth what the grading fee was. And certainly their PSA 9s, at least have one or two of those guys probably will not be even worth what the grading fee was in some of those base cards. So there are certainly cards being submitted today, but you can make the case right now at this moment for submitting those cards off. Because if they come back in PSA 10s, they're quite valuable. So my theory on this is there will always be junk slabs because there will always be speculation. And the total number of junk slabs is going to get greater and greater and greater every single year because a percentage of all of the cards getting graded at any moment in time will turn out to be of players who do not work out and who do not become valuable in the long run. Because by the way, that happens with like 90+% of the rookies out there, that their cards eventually go down and down and don't become worth much. In fact, it's 99% that happens with over the course of time. So yes, naturally, if only 1% of all cards, of all rookies that are produced are going to have a lot of value in the long run, then naturally 99% are going to have less value in the long run and could fall into the category of being junk slabs. So yes, we are in a junk slab era, kind of. Is it harmful? I don't think so. Because at the moment that people are grading, it's worthwhile for the most part. And I'm going to tell you why in this video. I'm going to tell you how in this video you can assess if it's worthwhile for you or not with certain cards that you're thinking about grading right now. What it does mean is they're going to have a lot of landfills full of a lot of, worthless plastic slabs in the future. That is true. That's probably what's going to happen to a lot of these slabs eventually. A lot of them will probably just end up in landfills. It's not a great thing for the environment, but that is, I think that is probably the worst part of the junk slab era, so to speak. Now, is grading worth it in general? My answer to that, in general terms, is yes. I am a big proponent of grading. That does not mean you should grade every card. And we're going to talk about what you should grade in just a minute. There's a lot of cards you should not grade. And there are people that grade way too many cards. But in general, I am a big proponent of grading. And for all of those of you out there who don't like grading because of the turnaround times, because of the inconsistency in the grades, because of the cost, because of the reliance on the hobby on grading right now, it seems. Look, I get it. I understand your view on all of those things, but that doesn't mean that grading is not worth doing, and that doesn't mean that grading is a scam. Because if you look at the numbers and you look at the data, grading is worth doing a lot of times. And no, grading is not a scam. Just because you don't like inconsistencies, which I get, just because you don't like turnaround times and prices and maybe the way the grading companies behave, that does not make it a scam. It is not a scam. Grading is very, very important to the sports card hobby. And that's not to excuse those things. I don't like inconsistencies. I don't like when my PSA order comes back and I'm getting 7s on cards that I thought for sure were 9s or 10s, and then knowing that I could probably crack and resubmit some of those cards and probably get 9s on them because I would get a different grader that day. I don't love that, but that is the reality of grading and the truth of the matter, or it's at least the reality of grading today with human graders and the extent of cards that are running through PSA, especially, which means that inconsistencies are just bound to happen. Any company that has been scaling as quick as PSA has, where the volume is coming in as fast as it has been to PSA, that's a really hard thing to scale and get consistent quality every time. And we've seen examples of PSA not being able to deliver on that, of not being able to output consistent quality every time. And that comes along with that type of growth. And it's not just PSA that suffers from that, the other grading companies as well. I get the frustrations, but there's still a lot of really good reasons to grade. The first of which is just to certify the authenticity of a card. Authentication is critically important. And going back to what I said about that tweet that went out where somebody remembered back to the good old days of card shows where nothing was graded. I'll tell you guys, I went to card shows back in the 1980s when I was a kid. In the pre-grading era, it wasn't the good old days. It was definitely not the good old days. If you wanted to buy a fake 1952 Mickey Mantle and think you were buying a real one, or buy a fake 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan or a 1979 Wayne Gretzky, which was superly commonly faked and sold at those card shows, if you wanted to buy one of those thinking you had a real one, sure, then it was the good old days. It was the good old days for being able to buy fake cards. And by the way, it was also the good old days for buying trimmed cards, because dealers could clip a little edge or a little corner off a card and nobody would know because there wasn't any grading to detect if the thing was trimmed or manipulated, etc., right? So grading has added a really important layer of authenticity. And frankly, without grading, the card market never would have grown the way that it has. Cards would never be fully appreciated as a legitimate alternative asset class for investing purposes. You cannot invest into an asset where there is a likelihood that it is faked or manipulated. Grading has given investment dollars security in knowing people are coming into this market who are trying to buy high-end pieces, who are trying to treat them as alternative assets and park them away and put them in safes and collections and hope that they become a lot more valuable in the long run, which is a lot of what has been fueling the market, particularly recently, the high end of the market. That type of spending and investment would never occur if grading were not here. because there would be way too many questions about authenticity and it would scare people away, particularly the higher dollar investor crowd. It would scare them away from the sports card market. Grading also assesses condition. And I made the joke earlier in the show that when you used to go to those card shows in 1980, the dealers used to have every single card on their table labeled as mint or gem mint. The dealer would tell you that every card they owned was mint. Even though they weren't, even though a lot of those cards would probably get like PSA 6s or 7s if grading were around back then, they would tell you every card was mint, right? So you need the third-party grader to give a certification of condition. And I get it's not perfect and I get it's inconsistent, but you know what? It's a lot better than it used to be. And that condition rating is very, very important. By the way, it makes it way easier to sell and buy cards online. And that is a huge reason for the growth of sports cards. Online marketplaces, obviously you guys know eBay, Golden, Fanatics Collect, all the online marketplaces, they are a massive, massive reason why cards are now more valuable and people are more willing to put money into cards because there's actual liquidity. You can sell cards with somewhat ease. You can buy cards with somewhat ease because of all of the online marketplaces. Without grading, it makes the high end of that almost impossible. You need the grading on the high end so that people know what they're buying, what the condition of the card is that they're buying. It's just critically important. Of course, grading also protects your cards. It properly labels your cards. It helps you organize your cards. The set registry on PSA is a really cool feature for some people. People love building out complete sets and competing to show that they've got the best, highest graded set of a particular type of cards. By the way, grading is also very important with insurance. If you've got a high-end collection and you're trying to insure your collection, grading is really important to prove the value of your collection and to prove what you have. And above all, the most important thing, I think for most people probably watching this video about grading, is that it adds market value, particularly if you get high graded cards. The idea that you can pull a new fresh card out of a pack in 2025 raw, send it off to PSA, and if it comes back at PSA 10, the card's probably worth about 3 times as much. That is a tremendous benefit to grading. Whether it should be or shouldn't be that way, doesn't matter what you think. The market has spoken, and the market has quite, clearly demonstrated for many years that high graded cards, and in particular gem mint 10s, are worth considerably more, multiple times more than raw cards. So as long as there is a financial incentive for people to grade, people will grade. As long as the market continues to value graded cards more than raw cards, people will grade. Grading is here to stay. Grading serves a huge purpose. Grading is not a scam. There's a lot of good reasons for grading. But how do you know if you have a card that is actually worth grading or not? Very simple question to answer if you look at it with economics, if you look at it financially. You can actually put together a little rubric on this to answer this question and to play with these, numbers that I'm about to go over. I set one up in a Google Sheet last night in about 3 minutes just to kind of play around with this, right? So we're going to focus first on ultra modern cards that are coming, let's say cards that are coming fresh out of packs, over the last couple of years, right? A PSA 10 in general goes for about 3 times more than a raw card. That's a rough estimate. It bounces around a little bit. It varies some by set and what the gem rate is. It varies some by the type of card. But as a general rule, it is safe to say as a rule of thumb that a PSA 10 is going to go for about 3 times more than a raw card. So if you believe that you can assess your cards well enough, determine the ones that you're going to send into grading, if you can assess them where 50% of the cards that you send in will come back with a PSA 10. We're going to use PSA only for this example right now. a 50% gem rate, 50% are going to come back with a PSA 10. And if you assume a cost of $25 per card to grade. Now, PSA actually just raised their prices, or they're raising them this week from $20 to $22, I think, for their kind of their lowest bulk level. I'm putting $25. We're going to include a few dollars here for shipping and that kind of stuff, right? So assuming $25 to grade, and this would be for, less expensive cards, because obviously if you got more expensive cards, the dollars go up and it changes the math on this. But for less expensive cards, $25 to grade, gem rate of 50%. That means that you will break even by grading a card that's market value is $50 in raw condition. So if you were to take a bunch of cards that are $50 in raw condition and send them all to PSA, assuming 50% of those cards get a PSA 10, and assuming it costs $25 to grade each card, and assuming that the ones that do get a 10 come back and are worth $150, you break even at $50 raw cards. That's your break-even point. Any raw cards that are above $50 are worth sending off for grading because you're going to make money. Any raw cards that are less than $50 raw are not worth sending off for grading in this equation because you are going to lose money trying to pay a $25 grading fee and only gemming those cards 50% of the time. So that's your basic math. If you can get a 50% gem rate and it costs $25 to grade and the cards are worth 3 times more in a PSA 10, then the math will tell you cards that are $50 raw are break even. Cards that are over $50 raw are worth sending off for grading. Okay, what if your gem rate is only 30%? Let's change that variable down. Let's say that you have a harder time figuring out what cards are going to PSA 10 versus PSA 9 or less, and you're only right about 30% of the time. In that case, the math changes to tell you that your break-even point is $84 for a raw card value of $84. So if you have a card raw that is worth less than $84, don't send it off for grading. You're going to lose money if you're only going to gem it 30% of the time. If you have cards that are worth over $84 raw, send them off for grading because you're going to make money, assuming a 30% gem rate, a $25 grading fee, and a PSA 10 going for 3 times more than a raw card. That's the simple math. So this math is actually pretty simple to do. If you set up a little bit of a spreadsheet, you could play with all the variables. You could say, well, what if a PSA 10 is only worth 2.5 times more? Or what if it costs me $50 to grade because I'm trying to grade higher end cards? Where is the math there? But in general, you can set up a simple spreadsheet like this and look economically. And I think the rule of thumb for most people is cards that are less than $50 raw are not worth grading. And that's where a lot of people make a mistake. A lot of people will send off a $20 or $30 raw, Prism base card, or maybe a cheap Prism silver card or something of that nature to grade. It's probably not worth it. If the card's under $50 raw, I would not grade it. If it's between $50 and, $85 raw, then you really have to scrutinize it because you're kind of in a range where you got to be right a good amount of the time about that being able to get a 10 for it to make sense. And if you're starting to go over $85 raw, certainly if you're starting to go over $100 raw, and you think the card looks really good, and this is all, by the way, prefaced on the fact that you've already looked at the condition of the card closely and you believe the card has a legitimate shot at a PSA 10. Assuming you've done that, if the card's over $100 raw, then I would almost always suggest sending it for grading. If the card's under $50 raw, I would very rarely suggest sending it for grading. And if it's somewhere in between, that's kind of where you get into a question where you want to be really critical about the card and really think about whether it's worth it or not. Now, this is different for vintage. What I was just talking about there was kind of ultra modern, right, from the last few years. With vintage, authenticity is critical. The equation is a lot different. And also with vintage, you can't use the equation of assuming a PSA 10 is going to sell for 3 times more than a raw card. Because in vintage, a PSA 10 will sell for a heck of a lot more than 3 times a raw card, but it's almost impossible to get PSA 10. So that whole part of the equation is kind of out of the picture. For vintage, what I would say is it a known player? If it's a well-known player, I would grade the card in just about any condition. Is it an important set, like 1952 Topps? If it's an important set, then I would grade the card in just about any condition, because even the commons from a very important set like 1952 Topps in low grade, PSA 1, PSA 2, even the commons, most of them sell for above the grading fee. So I would consider important player or important set. I would consider grading the card in just about any condition, unless it's completely, really, really like surefire PSA 1, really messed up. If it's neither of those things, if it's not an important player and it's not an important set, then I would still grade the card, but only if it looks like it's a higher condition card. Even if, it looks like it's going to grade pretty well. Doesn't have to be a PSA 10 by any means. But if this thing is a PSA 5, PSA 6, PSA 7 especially, PSA 8 especially, PSA 9 especially, then yeah, you're probably going to want to send it off for grading, because even if it's a common, it's going to be important for set builders who like to build the complete set and they want to get them in reasonably high grades, maybe PSA 5s and above or PSA 6s and above. Now, there's some variance there depending on what the set is. Grading 1978 Topps, for example, baseball, you want to be a lot more picky and demand higher grades versus 1956 Topps, where you're going to be willing to grade just about any card, even if it doesn't look like it's mint, right? So you got to assess the importance of the player, the importance of the set, but it's important in general to grade vintage cards, because authenticity and grading are critical to people being able to buy those cards. In fact, like here at Cards HQ, we don't buy raw vintage cards. We won't touch them. Too many problems with fakes, too many problems with trimmed and altered. We will only buy graded vintage. And there's a lot of people who will apply that standard. So that's a good reason to grade a lot of vintage cards. Now, where to grade? In today's world, even though a lot of people complain about PSA, I recommend PSA in almost every case. The argument for grading with the other grading companies, there are some arguments to be made, but they're kind of small arguments. Beckett, at this point, I really consider only for thicker cards. There's two scenarios I should say I consider Beckett. One for thicker cards, because I do like the subgrades, especially when it comes to like rookie patch autos, because those cards will typically have a little bit of damage. They may not 10, so I prefer the subgrades on those cards, so you can kind of see like, oh, it hopefully it gets a 9.5, right? Or it gets a 9, but you can see it's the surface that had an 8.5, and everything else about the card's actually pretty strong, like 9.5s across the board, other than surface, right? That's pretty common with like rookie patch auto cards. Beckett's good in those cases. The other time I would consider Beckett is if you're pretty certain a card would not get a PSA 10, but you think it's a surefire PSA 9. Then I would consider Beckett to hopefully get a BGS 9.5. I've done that with a few of my cards, where I'm like, this card has one minor defect. It has a surface scratch, or it has a dimple in the card, or it has one soft corner. Everything else about the card's perfect. That one defect will prevent it from getting a PSA 10. But I think it's got a shot at a Beckett 9.5. Then I'll send it to Beckett instead of getting a PSA 9. But for the most part, most of my cards are going to PSA. SGC at this point, I would not recommend them for any ultra-modern cards anymore, especially after PSA recently said that they are slowing down SGC and downsizing them, and they've already started to do all of that. I think SGC is still a viable option for lower cost vintage cards. Expensive vintage cards, I would send straight to PSA. Lower cost vintage cards, SGC, I think, is a viable candidate for that. CGC, obviously big player in trading card games, coming on a little more in sports cards, but the value's not there yet. CGC is one to keep an eye on for sure, but right now the value is just not there on the sports card side, although it is worth kind of monitoring. how CGC grows in the years ahead, because they're trying to get aggressive about that. By the way, if you're looking to grade your cards, I want to give a shout out to our grading partnership with Got Baseball Cards. Got Baseball Cards is another card shop here in Atlanta that they've submitted hundreds of thousands of cards for grading, maybe a million plus cards for grading at this point. They are true grading experts. They will pre-screen your cards. So if you're not sure, if you can't assess a card on your own, if you're not sure, is this a 10, is this a 9, Got Baseball Cards will take care of that for you. They'll give you a pre-screening assessment to help you determine if it's worth grading a card or not. And the way you can grade through Got Baseball Cards is you can go to sportscardinvestor.com and click grading in the main menu. They'll submit them all to PSA for you, or Beckett or SGC or CGC, but they'll do the pre-screening service and prep your cards for grading. So once again, sportscardinvestor.com, click grading in the main menu. You get discounted prices there with Got Baseball Cards. Okay, I've talked this whole episode about ways you can tell, if a card is worthwhile submitting to grading from a financial standpoint. But I want to end by just reminding you that none of this matters unless you're also assessing the condition of a card. Because no matter what the metrics say as to whether it's worth sending a card or not for grading, if it's an ultra modern card and the card has obvious issues that would prevent it from having any chance at a PSA 10, then it's not worth it, period. Generally, the only exception is if it's something super high end. If it's a $10,000 card, even if it's like a PSA 7, you still might want to send it just to get it slabbed and authenticated and all of those things. But for most ultra modern cards, you're not going to even take a chance at sending them if they have obvious defects. And so we've done plenty of other videos on the Geoff Wilson Show and on Sports Card Investor, where we've talked about how to assess cards for grading, how to look at the centering, corners, edges, and surface. So I'm not going to get into that very deep right now. I would recommend, if you want help on that, to go watch some of our other videos on Sports Card Investor and on the Geoff Wilson Show. Just search the word grading. And it would particularly on Sports Card Investor. We've done some nice tutorials on that over the years. But just as a 1-minute quick recap, a couple of tips. Centering. On some cards, it's really easy to assess. On some cards, it's really difficult. If it's difficult, one thing you can do is you can go onto eBay and look for PSA 10 copies of that card and compare the photo you see of that PSA 10 listing on eBay to your card and see how the centering compares. That's a good guide on a card where it's hard to tell centering. It's easy to go look at what other PSA 10s of that card, what they look like from a centering perspective, and look at your card. And of course, when you're assessing centering, don't just look left and right, look top and bottom as well, because certain cards can be really well centered left, right, but really poorly centered, with the top border being very small and the bottom border being very big, or vice versa, right? Obviously, corners, look at both the front and the back. Sometimes corner damage, the corner being a little bit bent in, it's easier to tell by looking at the back of the card. Edges, same thing. Look at the front and the back. And then finally, surface, which is the one that trips most people up. Most people are like, this card's well-centered. It's got sharp corners. It's got sharp edges. It's going to get a PSA 10. And I say, not so fast, my friend. Let's look at the surface. Because especially with chrome cards, the surface is where you typically have the most problems with surface scratches and sometimes little dimples in the surface. The best way to look at that is in a dark room under a bright halogen light. Turn the card back and forth in all directions and look for scratches and dimples. That's how you can tell if a card has surface issues. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. What suggestions do you have for assessing whether a card is worth it for grading? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget, these full-length episodes of The Geoff Wilson Show are available not just on YouTube, but we've got them back up again. They were stopped for a while, but we got them back up again on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. So go subscribe everywhere. And now go check out that video that Teapot did on the Market Movers channel on YouTube. If you haven't seen it already, it's a good one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon with my next episode. Take care, everybody.